Today's episode is brought to you by DeSanto Propane. DeSanto Propane is 4 generations strong as a trustworthy family-owned business with unmatched customer service. Go online at DeSantoPropane.com for more info or call toll-free at 1-800-752-4574. Since 1937, the difference has been DeSanto Propane.
All right, welcome back to the Debrief podcast. It has been a little bit. Josh Durso and Jackie Augustine here inside the FingerLakes1.com studio. The last time she and I were sitting here, the calendar said 2024. It does not say 2024 anymore. It says 2025.
How?
And we have a lot to talk about.
Okay, yeah, I guess so.
How's your 2025 been so far?
It's gotten off to a good start. I cannot believe that it's March already. But that tracks. I am not good at keeping track of time. So
Spring is it's felt like a landslide switch in the last 2 weeks. We went from the depths of winter
yes,
to what felt like mid-spring
weather,
in
yeah.
a week, and here we are. Everything is in blossom. All the things we have to talk about also in blossom. Oh, where should we start? Oh, wait, I know where we should start.
Oh, maybe
Let's
right here.
yeah, let's start with Seneca Falls. So, in case you missed it, earlier this month, the Seneca Falls Town Board voted on 2 resolutions related to Seneca Meadows at its normal, regularly scheduled meeting in the beginning of March. There was a lot of discussion about both. The meeting was highly attended, highly watched, highly covered. It got coverage from Syracuse and Rochester media and everybody in between. But the discussion afterwards and the coverage hinged on or circulated around a vote, those 2 votes that I mentioned. And basically whether the vote could stick or not, because from the audio and the video of the meeting, it didn't appear as though there was a motion or a second before the votes happened. Okay, so after the meeting ends, no one noticed it during the meeting. No one on the board noticed this situation or this oddity while the meeting was happening. It took, I guess, probably 12 or so hours before anybody really started to ask questions wait, why didn't they do this? Because there's plenty of resolutions passed at every meeting, and typically all of these votes flow a very
Right. Yep.
standard
The set
way.
format. Yes.
Motion, second, discussion, vote. So there were questions thrown at all media about whether the vote could stand or not, because there were not. So media reached out, did what it does, reached out to the town. Supervisor Frank Schmitter then said in a statement that the resolutions didn't require a second, implied that a motion had been made in that statement, and that the vote stood. Okay, so that prompted the reader questions that I'm going to answer before we get into just
Okay, great.
talking about it. Was the vote legal? Do they need to revote? Okay, so because of the argument that the town is making here, that it didn't require a second and that a motion was made, even though it doesn't appear by the video or audio that one was made, they don't have to, right? Because it's just sort of, it's just sort of the honor system. That's the best way. I've talked to some different attorneys about this situation. I've talked to municipal folks from different communities, and it just sort of comes back to, unless someone challenges it, which could potentially happen, it would be essentially an Article 78.
Right.
The vote could be challenged, which leads to the next question: do they have to revote? You don't have to revote, but my takeaway from this situation, this is where I want you to jump in, is if Robert's Rules of Order were formally adopted by the town board at its organizational meeting, and there is even the outside chance that this could further complicate an already complicated issue for the town of Seneca Falls, why not just revote? Even if you know what the outcome is going to be. I, for the life of me, and that's sort of the answer, like, do they have to revote? No. If it were me, I probably would just call for a new vote next month. Just double down on what you've already done. I don't get it. I don't get that part of it.
I don't understand.
I can't rationalize it.
It's not like I'm trying to get into the headspace of the town board members that voted in favor, right? It's not like you think this is not there isn't a history of litigation on this issue, right? I mean, it's not like you're saying, oh, well, this is something everybody's in favor of, so it doesn't really matter. Now, I'm not like that. I'm a rule follower, so I feel like it. Here's the thing, though. I don't know town law, right? Municipal law is divided. So what's required by a city and what might be required by a town, I don't know those finer details, but I think even if you don't adopt Robert's Rules of Order, I do think a motion of a governing body has to be officially put onto the floor and receive a second. So it just seems very odd that there would be this deviation. I mean, and again, this is the purpose of minutes, right? Your official minutes don't need to include a full transcription of everything everyone said. That's great, and I appreciate when local government clerks, when town and city clerks give a very comprehensive set of minutes, but it's supposed to include, if you look at the guidance to clerks, the motion, who seconded it, and then the results of the vote through a roll call, unless it doesn't require a roll call vote, and then you can just note that it was that it passed. So I guess I just don't understand how they wouldn't think there would be an Article 78 proceeding. And even if there isn't right now, if you know that this issue is likely to be controversial going forward, which we all know, that's an open secret, right? This is a controversial issue. Why wouldn't you, if you're the town board who's convinced you're doing the right thing, why wouldn't you want to codify it in a way that at least you're sure couldn't be either legally challenged or politically challenged as looking rushed or somehow done in a way that doesn't conform with normal procedure? Like, it draws questions, and it seems like if you're a town board member who wants this to go the way it's going, and you're trying to tamp down criticism and try to make everything above board, then why not just dispel any questions and do it the right way?
So I reached out to, this wasn't in any stories that were published on fingerlakesone.com, but I reached out to the Committee on Open Government to get the state's take on what would be required. And essentially it comes down to whatever the town sets at its organizational meeting. So whatever parameters the town or a town puts on how it will operate at its organizational meeting, those are the rules that have to be followed throughout the rest of that calendar year until you do it again at your reorganizational meeting. And this is one thing that I haven't had time, nor frankly the interest to dig into, is did the town, how detailed was the town in its records during that first meeting, which usually happens at the end of December or the beginning of January, laying out how it will function and how it will operate? Did it take a vote on adopting Robert's Rules? Did it not take a vote? Was it assumed? Was it written down somewhere? Is it in the minutes? If the answer is yes to any of those questions, this vote could be legally challenged.
Yes.
Whether it's successfully legally challenged or not is a separate debate entirely. I am just saying it could be, which again goes back to my original point of why not just revote?
Right,
Because
right.
it would make life much easier on an otherwise very controversial topic to begin with, especially given the board makeup and given the positions that have been laid out so far by electeds and the community input they have heard and received, I don't think there's any reason to believe that the vote would be different on April 10th or whenever the town board's first meeting in April is versus that of what it was in March. So why not just do it to protect yourself?
Yep, I think that's an excellent point. A lot of jurisdictions do not formally adopt Robert's rules. The city of Geneva has not formally adopted Robert's rules. So then in questions like that, it is a matter of custom. And so I think that the noting the fact that this breaks with customary procedure would probably, I mean, why open it up to a lot of litigation if you don't need to do that? I don't know.
Well, and
I
going
don't
back
like
to
the
the
digging in the heels, like, well, we did it and now it's just going to stand. It's like, well, no, you actually are exposing the town to additional litigation by leaving this an open question.
yeah, and it just muddies the water
Right.
in an area where, the state is going to, there's also a very interesting, there's some very interesting legal reading for anybody interested out there to do. If you're curious about the state's role in all of this and how often they look at local law, because New York is a home rule state, and actually go the direction that the local folks, the local government entity wants them to go. So in this case, there's been a lot of the narrative from the town board has been, this is up to the state. The state is going to be the one who ultimately decides whether Seneca Meadows is able to expand or not. It's their decision. It's not ours. It's mixed actually in terms of legal, different legal cases in terms of does the state consider local laws when they're making these types of decisions? Sometimes. Sometimes they go along with the town if the town is for or against. Sometimes they go the opposite direction. How successful those legal challenges have been in the cases where the two sides are on opposing sides of it varies. Goes back to I think the first ruling in that category was in the early 1980s. And there were a couple others in the fracking space in the mid-2010s. So it's all very, very interesting. It's all very complicated. This, to me, just adds another wrinkle of potential legal complication. If in simplest terms, all they have to do to avoid more challenge is just revote. I genuinely don't understand why there isn't a revote.
Sorry, one point that just occurred to me as you were laying out some of their reaction. The idea that, well, it doesn't really matter what we do locally because the state's going to make the ultimate decision. That is not in addition to whether or not they incorporate the local law in their decision making. There's another piece of that, which is that the EIS statement. The state review of environmental impact is governed by federal NEPA, and one of the things that takes into account is economic impact as well. So the town, by accepting this host agreement, with this kind of financial magnitude, which we can talk about whether or not that's actually commensurate to the harm that is the community is exposed to or not, but they have actually kind of put a thumb on the scale when it comes to the environmental impact statement in that way. So I don't think that they can completely take a clean hands kind of approach and say, well, what we did doesn't really affect anything anyway, because by accepting that host agreement, that does, I assume, I'm not telling Seneca Meadows anything they don't already know, right? That strengthens their position that they're making an economic case.
Yeah. It's, again, the timing of all of this is really interesting, just sort of to put this on everybody's radar. I have been hearing throughout the duration of this process, if we want to call it a process, because there hasn't really been too much there hasn't really been too many like dedicated public events that the state has been involved in with regard to expansion yet. Those are coming. The DEC will eventually have to host public hearings and things like that. But decision, I have been told repeatedly, is coming sometime between June and September, which and that is blind, call it blind speculation, if you will. But my take throughout this entire situation has been, if that's when the DEC is saying its decision window is coming, and it does not have state or local permitting to operate beyond December 2025, then there can only be one outcome to the state's decision process, and that's continue operation, right? Like, given those sets of facts, like take the way people feel about it and the sort of like the economic realities and the environmental realities out of it, because of the way the state has set this up, I genuinely don't see the other scenario. Like, it would immediately turn into a legal battle where would probably last years by itself. Like, that legal process would take years.
Permitting operation, right?
And it would create a very, very odd dynamic
Well,
for
it would be
all
like the
parties
Greenwich
involved.
project with the Bitcoin in Dresden, right?
Yeah.
Where it's this constant fight of, well, you're really like not supposed to be operating, but we'll let you continue while we figure out what we're supposed to do with your operations.
But
which is
even there,
an undesirable situation.
but even there, the clock has nearly
Yes,
expired
it's not
on
it's
them. So
certainly
like,
not a one-to-one comparison. Yes.
but that's one of those, again, just, timeline, I think, is the thing that everyone should be really like thinking about, and really digging into the process, even if you're not one of the folks who's, there are a lot of really dedicated folks on the advocacy side, working really hard to help people understand what this process looks like, what the risks are, what the benefits are, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. I would encourage everyone to just take a look at the actual outline of rules that the DEC has for this process, and just sort of think about the timing, where we are now
Right.
versus when a decision will be made.
Right.
And it's really interesting. It also sets up a really interesting dynamic, depending on how the state rules on this permit. It sets up a really interesting debate about how the state views municipal waste and how it is going to, like, basically how serious of an issue it sees its waste problem as. And I think, if nothing else, this is really going to put light a fire under the folks who have been saying the state isn't taking any of these issues seriously enough for years. Although there have been some well-timed and released press statements and plans, there's not a lot of meat on those bones.
No, absolutely not.
And when it comes to action, in terms of, where does the waste go if not at one of the largest receivers of waste presently operating in New York State, there are some serious logistical hurdles that, even if they announced in June, say on June 1st or tomorrow, they said, nope, Seneca Meadows isn't going to be allowed to operate anymore after December 31st. The hoops that New York State would have to jump through to pull that off before the end of the year, there's a lot of them. They could do it, but I don't know that the political will exists there in Albany, with all of the other issues that they have to deal with, not just the ones that are New York State problems, but now the ones that they're being handed from Washington, D.C.
Right. And they've been given great cover by the local board saying, actually, we're fine with it. And it's going to be difficult for the DEC to tease out obviously there's overwhelming public opposition, but that is now at odds with this accepted and adopted resolution. assuming it does get adopted.
Speaking of at odds, housing in Geneva has been, every time I open up Facebook, I am greeted by a half dozen posts in various Facebook groups of people yelling about housing in the city of Geneva.
Yeah.
Please explain to us what's going on there. There are 3 projects
Yes.
currently being debated,
4.
discussed, 4 projects
Yes.
in various stages and timings. They're mostly early stage still, right?
Yes.
So, okay, get us up to speed where we stand right now.
Well,
with
I have
those.
no inside information on this, so I'm going to basically just recap what we've seen reported, right? Which is that, the city finally passed their zoning ordinance, which was ready before COVID, couldn't get done through COVID, and now is done. And they tasked the economic development director with implementing the comprehensive plan in line with the new zoning, and he's a professional and did it. So, we've got the county housing study, which has been saying you need workforce housing. We've got, if you read national planning documents, which I'm a nerd.
Those
and I
are
enjoy
exciting.
doing.
Those are exciting.
Yes, sorry, the stuff I like to do. It's referred to as the missing middle. So this housing that usually is more densely configured, but gives people options to enter the housing market at a lower price point. My personal preference is for different types of housing. What's being proposed in Geneva right now is either rental or homeownership. So there are 2 of each being proposed, 2 larger, multi-story, more dense rental proposals, one at the OEO site, which is on South Exchange Street. It's that big empty hole across from the Seneca Street parking lot, which, let me just put in a plug-in, would be an excellent development site if people didn't believe that we needed so much parking and couldn't think of a more creative way to do it. But some people loved urban renewal. And then the other site is Jackson Street, which is the former foundry site, but that's still in pre-development. Like the OEO site, I think, is further along.
Yeah.
I could have that wrong, but from the presentation with the developer, it sounded like they have a pretty good concept of what they want to do.
Yeah.
And I encourage people to watch that. It's a special meeting. It's on YouTube, and it's very enlightening about the OEO. And then Habitat for Humanity is looking at the site and has purchased the site on Crystal Street, which is, there are a couple like paper streets back off of East North Street. It's a beautiful area. I'm biased because our organization, Blueprint Geneva, has a community garden there. Yeah. So, that's my school bus used to go down to pick up kids there. So I've always had a kind of special eye on that area. And then Middle Street, there's a manufactured housing proposal, which I've heard people say are going to be trailers, but people should know that, the city of Geneva in its ordinances does not allow trailers. So it's manufactured housing, it's not trailers, for Middle Street and, now I'm blanking on the name. It's not Wadsworth, but the next street over. So there's a parcel there. It's not on the immediate lake-facing side. It's like the interior street. So those are the proposals. I think it seems to depend on the day and who you ask what the actual take on those things are. I've not heard a lot of pushback on the habitat plan. I've not heard a lot of pushback on the Middle Street plan, except for the discussion about whether or not they were trailers. I've not heard a lot of pushback about the OEO project either. I think people are kind of used to the idea of having that hole in the street filled. The city has put that proposal out several times, so it's not coming as a surprise. The Foundry site is the one that's getting more controversy, and I think that gets to kind of my underlying issue, which is that we are still stuck in this dichotomy of either you have to have a multi-unit rental structure or you have to have a detached home single-family purchase structure. And really, if we take seriously this notion of the missing middle, we've got to find a way to have more ownership in a non-detached single-family home structure. And the Foundry property could achieve that goal, but it would definitely take a more creative developer. And I have to say, in full disclosure, I probably shouldn't talk about this without saying, way back in 2016, Blueprint Geneva had a proposal for certainly not a multi-family structure like that, but kind of duplexes
Right.
Back in that area that would have been home ownership. It would have been a cooperative. And it was the environmental review for that project, which is what brought the notifications the notifications were going to happen anyway, but I guess it kind of sped it up because they had to stop our project and tell us, sorry, we're about to name that a Superfund site. So, sorry, all of that is to say that I do think there are some other creative strategies for the Foundry, but Blueprint has no interest, no current proposal, and will not be participating in any of those.
Housing is such an interesting topic.
It is.
It's so interesting.
And you've been doing a lot of work on it, so I'm interested in your take on these.
So, I am, fortunately or unfortunately, in the camp of we need to get to a point where there are more units online.
Yes.
Period. Not everyone is going to be happy with any of the outcomes. We are not going to have complete unison support for any single project or all of the projects together. That said, I think the way municipalities, and I give the city credit here, they've been working, I feel like, harder than most municipalities do to keep the community informed about what the details of these projects are. The disconnect, like it always is elected city officials, planners, developers are always left in this really difficult spot, basically weighing I don't want to call them vocal few, but you have a smaller group of individuals or people who take a keen interest or disinterest in a project and get very vocal about it, and they either hail it as the greatest thing ever,
Right.
or they say it's the worst thing ever, weighing that against the legitimate and genuine needs of the entire community. And you're often talking about weighing a group of, call it less than 50 people, versus the needs of whatever the population of Geneva is, plus the surrounding communities that would benefit from it. So, but we'll say, ostensibly like 10, 12,000. Like, that is such a bad place to have to operate from, because there are political consequences.
Right.
There are, the bad feelings that come from it. I'm reminded of what Jim Yockel said on Connections. He's been doing a lot of good work in Ontario County and around Rochester. He's the CEO of the Greater Rochester Real Estate Association, or something to that effect. 2024, I believe the numbers, he's got final numbers for, in their area, which includes Monroe County, but also Ontario, Livingston, and the Greater Rochester area. There were 500 homes on the market in the window that they were examining. If you go back 10 years, that number was around 3,000. We are so out of, and that's just like, it doesn't matter what the parameters are really, right? Of that, like, just take that baseline understanding, 500 units available now or for sale, right? 500 homes for sale right now. 10 years ago, there would have been 3,000 homes for sale in this area, whatever this area is. That just points to how bad the situation is. And, you know, having done more and more work in education and advocacy of some of the housing issues, especially from the standpoint of just trying to get more community buy-in and more units online, it is so stinking hard to sell people on a vision that they don't trust. And at the end of the day, the housing system that we have operated in for the last 30 years doesn't garner a lot of trust. Yeah. And that is what, and it's so much bigger than what anyone in Geneva or anyone in Ontario County or anyone in Rochester or Monroe County is left to like really deal with.
Right.
Right. Like you're having to right the ship for, 30 years of American policy on housing that has just not worked.
I agree. And I think that the concern is that, people are concerned about, obviously there's always going to be people who just don't want any change, right? So yeah. Let's just set that aside. But I think that there are concerns about, policies that are wealth extractive versus wealth additive. And I think that's a reasonable and good concern, and that should be front of mind. Again, not to harp on the comp plan, but I will. The city's doing their best to try, the council, to ignore it and not read it. But in the comp plan, and to say we need a new one when it already says in the comp plan how you can update and correct it using its own metrics. But one of the things is that, Geneva as a value is aiming towards being a more prosperous community. And what does that mean? Well, that has to be reflected in the decisions being made. And that's why I encourage people to watch the special meeting with the developers, because here's the thing. Yes, I understand. They're developers. They have a project that they're trying to sell us, right? So you have to take it with caution. However, if you listen to the actual data and metrics that they're using to make their economic decision, right? We're emerging from a period of time where Geneva could only get projects by a couple local people, and everyone ended up not supremely satisfied. I think I can say that with the outcomes. And now we're actually seeing a more regional interest in the Geneva market. So when you listen to the developers talk about the market changes, and then you go back to the comp plan that says, here are the indicators you're looking for, and this would be the modifications you need, we're in a great spot. Like, the staff is right on where they need to be and pursuing what needs to be pursued. The finer details of how these take shape is something that the council needs to get in gear about. But I'm not confident they can do it, because already, and take the Jackson Street property as the kind of classic example, the council discussion about that property has been muddied and full of misstatements, which does not engender public trust. So if the counselor can't be brought up to speed about how to talk about it in real terms instead of just speculative terms, what kind of trust or reassurance can be offered to the residents? So it's kind of a no-win situation at that point, because again, if you've got a person who wants to say this is going to be a low-income housing development, well, they've got it wrong from the start. So there's no coming back from that. And I don't want to say there's no coming back from that, but there just needs to be more community dialogue and an understanding of the actual project, the outcomes, and the mechanisms by which the city can actually hold developers to account for achieving those outcomes. That's been the missing piece for years and years, right? Geneva gets projects that make promises, and then those promises aren't delivered, and they didn't learn the lesson of putting in the legal clawbacks needed to like make good on that. I mean, look at the Legion property.
So like there are the systemic housing issues and then there are the local ones.
Right.
And to me, like a lot of what you're describing when it comes to like getting community buy-in is I'm reminded of a conversation I had with Matt Horn on a podcast probably it might have been 8 years ago now, 7, 8 years ago. It was a long time ago, about how communities, a lot of them outside of New York State, force developers, whether it's a national chain, whether it's a hotel, whether it's a store, whatever it might be, force them to comply with the things they want to see, their community wants to see. And they almost always do it.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, they're choosing you for a reason. So that's one thing that I just think like not enough local communities really like take that to heart and like realize the power they have.
No, we've talked about this
of,
before.
you know,
They suffer from low self-esteem, right? We've got a group, we've got a council that has low Geneva esteem. And that's a perpetual...
Geneva's not, this is not an exclusively
it's
Geneva
not,
problem.
I
Like,
was
it's
just going to
everywhere.
say, it's not exclusive to Geneva and it's not exclusive to this council. I mean, that has been a regional, persistent issue, which prevents communities from being empowered and actually influencing projects in the way that they could if they took seriously not just the worth of their community, but the power that they have in their position to work with a developer and say, these are our standards, these are our goals, and you will meet them or you will not do business here. We've fallen into a yes to anything kind of idea, which is not to say that that's what these current projects are, because again, the staff, I think in soliciting bids, they understand how things could be done differently.
Well, and just sort of to piggyback off of that, another thing that just from my own point of view, this is just Josh's opinion, another thing that really hurts trust and faith in a lot of these housing projects is the fact that all 4 of these proposals for Geneva could go forward and be online in 2 years. Just say they're all done tomorrow. Just you wake up and they're all there. You will still have a housing supply issue 2 days from now. These projects by themselves are not going to solve the problem. The problem systemically is that you cannot buy a single family home or build one for under $250,000. The building is the real issue. You can't build one for under $250,000. And at the end of the day, that's what makes the math of our current housing system just not work for the middle that everyone keeps referring to as like there's this gap in the middle. Well, how do you get turnover in housing? You get turnover in housing by having more access to senior housing so people can get out of their homes, who want to get out of their homes. Right. And you create an entry-level market, which just really doesn't exist anymore unless you're buying something that's, you know, foreclosed or about to be condemned. So at the end of the day, you know, I think everyone should take a look at these projects. The PDFs are online. I'll actually throw them in the show notes of the podcast after we get done here. But it's interesting. I will say me personally, I'm happy to see communities, period, talking about housing, seriously considering proposals to add housing and get to that like point of like doing something.
Oh yeah, I think it's a great time for Geneva to say, wow, look at like there's interest in our market. Like people see what, again, the comp plan said we're aiming for, which is the worth of building new units in the city of Geneva.
Yeah. Another Geneva story we have to talk about, the Marina project. Scrapped? Done? it over?
Is it a bad pun to say dead in the water? I don't know.
Dead in the water. Dead in the water.
I don't know. I'm no love lost here for the marina. I've thought that was a boondoggle for a long time. All the initial estimates done by like third-party people said it wasn't going to pencil out with what the city had available, but they pressed on, and yeah, I don't know. I don't have more to say about that.
It's over. It is interesting. My only observation on this particular story is just the how sometimes, because of how little people actually engage with the month-to-month activities of their local government, little tidbits like this can just fly under the radar completely, which is really what happened here. This initially was intended to be quite the grand accomplishment and project, and here we are. It's just not going to happen. Local elections, village elections are happening today in a lot of communities. Now, there are some village elections that are happening today. There are some that happen in May, and there are some that happen in June. Villages are very
I don't
unique.
understand this calendar. I'm sorry. I have to say, like, I spent some time on the New York State election calendar yesterday just to figure out what was what, and
Villages get to make their own rules.
yeah, that's interesting.
That's it. Villages just get to make their own rules, and 20 people show up to vote, and that'll be that. But there was one thing I wanted to quickly talk about. The last time we were here, we were talking about the village of Odessa and potentially
No one.
potentially having they actually drawn up a resolution to begin the discussion about dissolving their village because no one was going to run for mayor. Happy to report that 4 people decided to run for mayor. One person is running for 2 vacant trustee seats. They are not going to occupy both seats. There's just not a second person running for the other seat. The assumption here is that the highest vote getter from the mayoral race that doesn't win will be the one who gets appointed to the trustee seat. At least that's what I've been hearing. Unconfirmed nonsense. That's.
But they will have a government.
But they will continue to exist. They will continue to have a government, and as long as these things exist, I've always walked back and forth on this fine line between deliver services efficiently and maximizing local input and control. As long as these governments exist, you might as well take advantage of them and make sure that they're there and leverage them to make your community better. And I think in this case, a 4-way race for mayor is a heck of a long way from having no one to run for mayor.
Right.
And we got there, in basically a few weeks. There was a story in the Odessa paper, and shortly after that, I wrote a column about it. And a couple weeks later, we got candidates.
That's great.
So,
Well,
we
and
are.
I think between that one and then the Union Springs one, which I was looking at, which has like the Union Party or something, they're like running on the same ticket.
Classic local election.
I just thought, the actual, first of all, it's all very positive, at least what I saw. Okay, maybe I'm missing the dark underbelly of campaigning, but so far it looks very positive. And there was a note that was like, look at, no matter what happens, we've had great ideas and everybody needs to continue volunteering, and now we're all in it together. And I just thought, well, this is a feel-good story. This is great. That's what local elections should be, right? If you don't get a seat, you stay involved and you do stuff, because did you really mean it? Like, did you really want to help your community, or was it like a power trip? But I think maybe I'm getting too jaded by Geneva. It's like people fade away after
will
an election. It's
say,
just-
I can't remember whether it was Gallup or Pew, but they had released some research in January about perceptions of local government versus state and federal government, and the perception among a majority of people was overwhelmingly positive of local government.
Good.
And that just goes back to the point of a lot of times it's detached from the stuff we see on national television and things like that in big media. So, it's good, because at the end of the day, to your point about what those individuals were talking about with, we have a lot of good ideas here. Everyone's moving in the right direction. It's about making the community better. big year for town elections. We've got town and city elections across basically the entire Finger Lakes. I haven't actually dug in to see what the numbers are going to look like, but last time we had a local cycle, there were like 400 something seats up in our 5-county area. I'm assuming it's going to be another year like that. Petitions are being circulated now, I believe, for most of the races that are going to be that are going to be primaried in June,
Right.
or on the ballot in November. Are there any in particular that you're keeping an eye on? Obviously, you're watching the city probably with quite a bit of interest.
Yeah.
You're not running, right?
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Nope, never again. But yeah, it's weird. I mean, the city elections are going to be strange because
It is interesting that both Republicans and Democrats have gotten behind a single candidate already for
Right.
mayor.
Right, which I
That's-
hope is a good sign.
That's got to be a good sign.
But my only concern is that some of the Republican candidates who are actually Democrats that the Democrats didn't endorse, they've got this statement out about their sustainable development platform, and I mean, they're not keeping it particularly close to the vest. So this again is another election that's going to be about lakefront housing. Not just lakefront housing, lakefront development in general, because some people are talking about housing and some people are talking about hotels. And I just don't understand how, well, whatever. I mean, the Geneva Republicans just don't seem to get it, that not only do people not want that, but also, like, it's just not possible. Like, they all say, oh, we'll just easily do this. And I just wish that they could find more candidates who have deeper experience in municipal government or could take the time to actually investigate the claims that are being made about lakefront development. Like, you can't just build on the lakefront as it is. It used to be water, and then it was garbage. And the
Landfill.
the effort it took to keep the former Ramada built and standing, even the effort it's going to take at the OEO site, which is so much further. Like, again, listen to the developer discussion, because I wish we could have a pre-election training school where people who are interested, who are brand new, who've never been to a meeting, could learn a little bit about the history of their community and what some of the challenges have been and the data, and then start talking about real solutions.
That would scare off most people from even considering, because that's when you learn that no matter how small the government is that you're entering or that you're trying to be a part of, it is incredibly complex and time consuming,
Yep.
whether it's a tiny village or whether it is a whole city or county. So it's just really complicated stuff. I'm going to be interested to see what kind of candidates crop up this time, because I think we're starting to see, I think after last year, we're starting to see more engagement in rural areas. I'm very interested to see what role education plays in who gets involved, especially when it comes to some of the school issues that we're seeing. Really make some school board races pretty contentious too around the region. Watching that, just because it could make for quite an interesting election season. One other topic I wanted to talk about, rant about for a minute: smartphone ban. So our federal government is in the process of dissolving the Department of Education, correct? Like that's happening, it seems,
That
right?
way.
Okay. And I think it's universally agreed that the way New York State currently does K through 12 organizationally with town school districts isn't working the way it might have 40, 50, however many years ago. And yet the big policy that we're getting out of Albany is banning cell phones. That is going to be what changes everything for students. I would just like to say that I really, really hope that this has an impact on student outcomes, or the impact that its supporters say it will, because there has been so much focus on this now, not just from the governor, but from a lot of the teachers union and a lot of other folks who are advocating, saying this is going to make a tangible difference. I hope it does, because if they spend all of this political capital and will and energy on something that really just makes I guess, the lives of teachers in classrooms a little less annoying, because I would imagine it's probably very annoying having to deal with kids pulling out their phones all the time and that sort of thing. I hope it has a very big impact on that front, and student outcomes just magically turn around, because there are some really big issues that the state needs to deal with when it comes to really delivering a good quality education to its students by the time they leave high school and do whatever they decide to do next. It feels like a huge mess. In my mind, it feels like a huge mess. Just this past week, we found out there's two school districts in Wayne County, two small school districts in Wayne County that are looking at reorganizing, merging, Marion, Williamson. It's I'm a little befuddled by it, honestly, because I understand that everyone wants to point to Facebook and Instagram and Meta and Google and all of these tech companies and TikTok and blame them for the reason why kids are how they are. It's all because of technology. It's all because of this social media and kids. The reason why mental health is in the toilet in this country is because of social media. Yes, but there are a lot of other factors there. A lot of other factors, systemic factors. The direction that we've gone on a fiscal policy, from an economic policy standpoint in this country over the last 30 years, we just got done talking about the housing crisis.
Right.
I don't think you can talk about any of the symptoms that students are showing in the classroom and say that's caused by the phone, and not any of the other 30 reasons that they all have to feel the thing. It's a huge mess in my mind. And unfortunately, instead of leading and doing something truly unique and doing something truly different and really trying to reinvent itself, the state seems to be taking the easy way out, which looks like just getting a political win among their own constituents who already are dug in, opposed to the role that technology now plays in our lives, whether we like it or not. That's, I don't know, end rant. That's all I got. It's very frustrating. It's very, very frustrating.
Well, I respect your rant, and I don't have as strong an opinion on this issue as you do, but I agree that there are a lot of things like the incentive program for municipal consolidation, which met with mixed results, but doing something like that for schools, getting people reoriented and thinking about, with a declining population, is the current structure really the best use of resources to really meet student needs, which, as you mentioned, are varied and deep. And I mean, do I trust experts who say that use of devices, especially in younger aged kids, does impact their behavior and their brain development and reduce attention spans and lead to addictive activities? Yes, I'm not an expert in that field,
there.
so I defer to them.
Agreed.
I'm still in the camp where science matters, and I believe experts who actually have a background that tracks with their research. Let me just, not self-proclaimed experts. But I agree with you that, I mean, look at what's going on, particularly in upstate and rural communities. I mean, we have more students facing homelessness, more students facing hunger, more students whose parents might be facing either incarceration or difficulty getting back into the workplace after incarceration. Like, there are a lot of issues that impact the student who's walking through those doors in the first place.
Yep.
That said, if districts are looking toward the state or looking to the state to impose a cell phone ban so that they have a buffer between their own desire to do that and the angry parents who are going to contest, I mean, I have a student in the school who has a smartphone. I like the convenience of being able to check in and say, like, hey, how's your day? Or, oh, I forgot we have an appointment. I got to pick you up. Like, do I like that? Sure. But I don't know, again, what it's like in the elementary school, in the middle school. My personal feeling is I was not a fan of devices at those ages for kids, but I can appreciate where you're coming from, that of all the things that could be done, this one, with the controversy associated with it, might not. If you're going to do something controversial, maybe this wasn't the one. But I guess we shall wait and see what happens. I just hope the other issues are going to be addressed, because, with federal cuts to school lunch programs and also food assistance in the home for a variety of other programs, kids are going to be hungrier when they get in the door, and they're going to find less to eat when they get there. And, I think everyone should try to study calculus on an empty stomach and see how it goes.
I think, to me, this is really just what it comes down to. And I take it with a grain of salt, but every family is poorer today than they were 30 years ago.
Well, not every family, but 99.
Here in the Finger Lakes.
Yes, agreed.
Here in the Finger Lakes, every middle-class family, for the most part, has less value in their dollar than they did 30 years ago. Every poor family has less, low-income family has less than that value was 30 years ago. So you can't just keep operating in this world like where policy gets made and it's like, well, if we just do this one thing, everything will be fixed. No, it doesn't work like that.
Right. We're making middle-class policies for under-resourced communities.
Yeah.
And you use that term under-resourced, which now I'm probably in violation of an executive order, because I think that's one of the words that's been struck as equity. But that's the reality of people's lives. And as you're saying, your dollar is not going as far. And there are real resource issues in communities. And if you look at those state outcome reports for testing and benchmarking, and then you track it against wealth in those corresponding communities, it's hard. Again, I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to say there's causation, but I see a correlation. And I think it's hard to deny that the economic issues are driving school performance issues in a way that, need to be addressed.
Definitely. All right. Hey, that is going to do it for us today. If you have a question you'd like to see discussed or answered on a future episode, you can send it over to debrief@fingerlakes1.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.